David, in trying to discern the relationship between science and theology and looking for consonance, as they say, one of the fundamental issues is the nature of consciousness. And you've talked about the philosophical underpinnings of modern assumptions of consciousness and where it comes from a scientific point of view. And so to understand the philosophical nature of the modern theories of consciousness, physically oriented, can that help us to articulate science and theology?
Well, it's a good example of where the cultures of modern science and theology tend to run afoul of one another, not where the research does. You have to place the question of consciousness and the quest for understanding it within the history of the rise of modern scientific method, because we're all heirs of the 17th century. And the great shift, the great paradigm shift is towards a purely inductive model of research, which is something that can never be perfectly realized, but this becomes the ideal, allied to a mechanistic picture of nature. Now, a mechanistic picture of nature is one from which what look like qualities that have been misattributed to nature by analogy to human intellect are removed again from our picture. So final causes, formal causes, purposes. And we examine nature just as a system of mechanistic processes. Now, whether then you're getting a real picture of nature or you just have a very powerful methodological discipline is a question. But in the early days of the scientific revolution, largely it was assumed the latter, and the mental and the spiritual was placed in a separate category, creating this ungainly dualism that for short form we call Cartesianism now, in which nature really is a mechanism, and then mind inhabits it like a ghost, to use Gilbert Ryle's phrase, the ghost in the machine, and God is an agency outside it. But, reason abhors a dualism, and it was inevitable that what started as a method would become a metaphysics. That is, the mechanical picture of nature ceased to be just a way of approaching nature for limited, local, finite investigations and became supposedly a picture of reality as a whole.
But certainly it made progress, and certainly by freeing itself from theological dogma, it enabled enormous understanding of reality. Nobody can deny that.
Right. I'm not sure theological dogma was actually as much the problem as people think it was, because we think in terms of the Galileo affair, which was more a conflict between two very egotistical men. But by freeing itself from what had come to be thought of as Aristotelian models of causality, it allowed all sorts of progress in empirical. Now, even then, I should point out that what it meant by Aristotelian causality had already been subtly mechanized by that point, but that's a subordinate concern. However, as I say, because of the power of this model, and because it's really undecidable logically whether this model is itself a picture of reality or a filter that allows us to get to certain physical truths that we wouldn't be able to otherwise, remains open. Because even as I say, induction is an ideal that's never perfectly realized. I am getting to the issue of mind, honestly. So that even in, say, biological sciences, we never stop investigating, say, organs by asking what their function is. We ask the cui bono question, what good is this? What does it do? What's its purpose? And then we tell ourselves, well, that's a methodological fiction, whereas the mechanical picture is the reality. Of course, it could be just the opposite. The purposive question might be reflecting reality, and the mechanical picture might be the methodological fiction. Both, very good philosophical arguments, believe me, can be made that that's the case. But whatever the case is, when it becomes the metaphysical picture of reality, mechanism then has to account for the things that originally it was content just to put into a different sphere, like mind. That means that a model of reality that was devised specifically by banishing from it everything reminiscent of mind now has to be used to explain mind. mind must be seen as an emergent phenomenon from physical nature. Now, in the sciences, this often means just that people confuse the question of consciousness with cognitive science, which are two different issues.
Sure.
Cognitive science is about the correlations between, say, brain events and experiences, say, or states of mind. The question of first-person consciousness and consciousness as a unified experience and an irreducibly intentional experience is a different sort of question. And then it's a question of how this, which all these qualities that are supposedly the contrary of mechanism, emerged from purely mechanistic processes. Now, as it happens, in philosophy of mind, pure physicalism is sort of in retreat at the moment. It's an odd feeling for me to be in the mainstream, because I haven't been for much of my career. But more and more, there's a sense that most of the emergentist models of mind have failed. And so in philosophy of mind, there tend to be, for those who are still committed to a physicalist picture of some kind, more extreme options are now on the table.
Correct. What are the implications of that for the science-theology dialogue in general?
Well, part of it is to free the dialogue from the cultural assumptions. That is, the culture of the sciences, which has taken, let's be honest, I mean, the mechanical picture of nature doesn't hold anymore anyway for many. I mean, it certainly doesn't help us in the realm of quantum mechanics. And more and more there are people in, say, molecular biology that question it as a proper way of understanding organic systems. Nonetheless, that's the prejudice, the sort of underlying premise that holds in the culture of the sciences in the modern world, that the mechanistic picture is true. And there you really, you do have an inevitable conflict between the cultures of science and theology. Because obviously, theological tradition is not going to be able to see mental phenomena or the experience of consciousness merely as an emergent residue of a mechanical process. At the level of what's actually discovered on the ground, I mean, real empirical discoveries, there's no conflict. There's simply different sorts of questions being asked. But culturally, the mechanical model is a profound, I want to say prejudice, but let's just say presupposition.